In the last centuries of the Bronze Age, one of the most dramatic collapses in history took place. Around 1200 BC, a wave of destruction swept across the eastern Mediterranean, toppling long-standing states and permanently reshaping the political landscape of the ancient world. The collapse was vast and without precedent. The Hittite Empire, once a rival to Egypt for dominance, disappeared outright. Mycenaean Greece, the world of Agamemnon and Achilles, splintered into scattered local communities. Along the Levantine coast, wealthy trading cities went up in flames. Evidence from Troy shows that the legendary city also fell during this turbulent era. Its walls were breached, and its streets were left covered in arrowheads, spear points, and burnt remains. Egypt, Babylonia, and Assyria managed to survive the storm, but came out greatly weakened. Their influence waned, provinces slipped from their control, and their treasuries ran dry. At the center of this upheaval were the so-called Sea Peoples, an informal coalition of tribal groups whose attacks helped drive the collapse of the Bronze Age world. In this video, we'll piece together evidence from various sources to understand who these peoples were and what ultimately became of them. The earliest known mention of the Sea Peoples comes from before the Bronze Age collapse. In the second year of Ramesses II, pirates known as the Sherden attacked Egypt. Ramesses II defeated them in the Nile Delta and took many captive. His inscription on the Tanis stele describes the raid and notes the ongoing threat the Sherden posed to Egypt's Mediterranean coastline. The unruly Sherden, whom no one had ever known how to combat, they came boldly sailing in their warships from the midst of the sea, none being able to withstand them. The Sherden captives were later absorbed into the Egyptian army. In 1274 BC, the forces of Ramesses II and the Hittite king Muwatalli II clashed near Kadesh in what is now southern Syria. We have both Egyptian and Hittite accounts of the battle. In it, the Sherden served as the pharaoh's personal guard. The Sea People's next appearance in Egyptian sources during the reign of Pharaoh Merneptah. In 1208 BC, a Libyan prince named Murye formed an alliance with several tribes later identified as Sea Peoples. This was no quick raid. The invaders came with their families. Women, children, and the elderly traveled alongside the warriors, hauling wagons loaded with possessions. They were seeking a new land to settle. This invasion is described in a long inscription on the walls of the temple at Karnak. The battle was brutal. Egyptian figures claim that more than 6,000 invaders were killed and over 9,000 were taken prisoner along with their families and belongings. Merneptah announced a great victory. His forces had halted the advance. The Karnak inscription lists their names: the Equish, Teresh, Lukka, Sherden, and Shekelesh. Merneptah's scribes portrayed them as northerners who came from every land, and as desperate people who spend their days marching and fighting to fill their bellies. They came to Egypt in search of food for their mouths. After this, Egypt remained quiet for 30 years until the Sea Peoples made another attempt at invasion. This episode is recorded in the inscription on the walls of the mortuary temple of Ramesses III at Medinet Habu.
The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms, from Kate, Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Elashia on, being cut off at one time. A camp was set up in one place in Amuru. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which has never come into being. They were coming forward toward Egypt, while the flame was prepared before them. Their confederation was the Peleset, Tjekker, Shekelesh, Danuna, and Weshesh lands united. They laid their hands upon the land as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting, our plans will succeed.
The Sea Peoples attacked Egypt from both land and sea. Ramesses III first defeated their forces in a land battle at Jahi, and then lured their fleet into a trap in the Nile Delta, where he destroyed them. Those who reached my frontier, their seed is not, their heart and soul are finished forever and ever. Those who came forward together on the sea, the full flame was in front of them at the river mouths, while a stockade of lances surrounded them on the shore. They were dragged in, enclosed, and prostrated on the beach, killed and made into heaps from tail to head. Our next source does not come from Egypt, but from Ugarit, a large and wealthy trading city on the Syrian coast. We have a letter from the king of Ugarit, Amurapi, to the king of Elashia. This is what Amurapi writes. My father, behold, the enemy ships came, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the land of Hatti, and all my ships are in the land of Lukka? Thus the country is abandoned to itself. May my father know it. The 7 ships of the enemy that came here inflicted much damage upon us. So if any more enemy ships arrive, let me know so that I can decide what to do. Amurapi, in a panic, also wrote to the Hittite viceroy in Carchemish. To the king, my lord say, thus Amurapi, your servant, I wrote you twice, thrice news regarding the enemy. May my lord know that now the enemy forces are stationed at Rasu, and their avant-garde forces were sent to Ugarit. Now may my lord send me forces and chariots, and may my lord save me from the forces of this enemy. Troops from Carchemish did indeed set out to help Ugarit, but they arrived too late. The city was seized by the enemy and destroyed. A report from the Hittite viceroy has survived.
When your messenger arrived, the army was humiliated and the city was sacked. Our food in the threshing floors was burnt and the vineyards were also destroyed. Our city is sacked. May you know it. May you know it.
These are the main sources. There are also many mentions of different sea peoples in documents, such as the Amarna letters, but most of these are just name references with no meaningful details. So, for sake of time, we'll skip them for now and move straight to the theories about the origins of each group. One of the most prominent groups among the sea peoples were the Peleset. In the inscriptions from Medinet Habu, they are shown wearing feathered headdresses and fighting on both the land and sea. The prevailing scholarly view identifies the Peleset with the biblical Philistines. Egyptian sources say that after their defeat by Ramesses III, they settled on the southern coastal plain of Canaan. Over time, they formed a confederation of 5 cities: Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza, and developed a culture in which Aegean elements mixed with local Canaanite influences. The Philistines remained an important political and military force in the region until the Assyrian and Babylonian conquests in the 8th to 6th centuries BC. After that, they gradually disappeared, leaving behind only the name of their land, Philistia, from which the modern word Palestine ultimately derives. Where the Peleset came from is still highly debated. Most scholars point to the Aegean, especially Crete and Cyprus, based on both material culture and a few linguistic clues. For example, the Philistine ruler was called a Saran, a word that resembles the Greek word tyrannos or the Hittite Sarawanis. But so little is known about the Philistine language that firm conclusions are difficult. Interestingly, the Greeks called the pre-Greek inhabitants of the Balkans Peleskoi. Some researchers notice the similarity between Peleskoi and Peleset, but this idea rests entirely on the resemblance of the names. So saying the Pelasgians were definitely the Peleset would be premature, even if the hypothesis is appealing and fits well with other evidence for an Aegean origin of the Philistines. We actually have a full video about the Philistines, and we'll provide a link at the end of the video if you're interested. In the late Bronze Age, the name Lukka referred to a region in southwestern Anatolia. Scholars generally agree that the later toponyms Lycia and Lycaonia derive from this name. In the Phoenician city of Byblos, an obelisk of King Abishemo, who ruled around the turn of the 19th and 18th centuries BC, has been found. Its inscription mentions someone named Kukun, son of Lukka. Some scholars consider this the earliest likely reference to the Lukka people. After that, however, the Lukka disappear from written records for nearly 4 centuries. Their next appearance comes in the Amarna letters of the mid-14th century BC. In this correspondence, the Egyptian pharaoh accuses the king of Alashia of harboring the Lukka, who were raiding Egyptian lands, and the king of Alashia replies that he himself suffers from their constant attacks. Hittite texts from the same period, including prayers to the sun goddess Arina, list the Lukka among the lands paying tribute to the Hittites. Most scholars identify the Lukka as the ancestors of the Lycians, known from the classical era. The Lycian language was Indo-European and related to Luvian, and the Lycians referred to themselves as Trimis or Termele. The people of Lukka were skilled seafarers and pirates. The Hittite archives contain numerous letters from coastal cities and Hittite client states complaining about constant raids and looting by the Lukka. Unlike their neighbors, the Lukka were not united under a single monarch. Hittite sources describe them as either tributary clients of the Hittites or as enemies against whom the Hittites sought alliances. Later they appear as Hittite allies. For example, a contingent from Lukka fought alongside the Hittite army at the Battle of Kadesh, but roughly a century after Kadesh, the Lukka turned against their former allies. The last known Hittite king, Suppiluliuma II, campaigned against them and even reported victories, but he apparently failed to subdue them. During the Bronze Age collapse, the Lukka seem to have played a key role in the destruction of the Cypriot cities and in the fall of one of the major commercial centers of the age, Ugarit. After the Bronze Age collapse, Lycia came under strong Greek linguistic and cultural influence due to its proximity to the Ionian Pole and the island of Rhodes. Full Hellenization of the Lycians, however, was not completed until after the conquests of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC. Regarding the group known as the Equish, most scholars think that the Egyptians meant the Achaean Greeks. The phonological similarity between the Egyptian name Equish and the Greek Achaioi supports this idea, and late Hittite records often mention pirate raids by the Ayawa. This shows that the Achaean Greeks did in fact conduct coastal raids. A description of one such failed raid against Egypt has even been preserved in Homer's Odyssey. Here it is. So willed the god who gives and takes away. 9 ships I manned, equipped with ready stores, intent to voyage to the Egyptian shores. In feast and sacrifice my chosen train, 6 days consumed, the 7th we plowed the main. Crete's ample fields diminish to our eye, before the boreal blast the vessels fly. Safe through the level seas we sweep our way, the steersman governs, and the ships obey. The 5th fair morn we stern the Egyptian tide, and tilting o'er the bay the vessels ride. To anchor there my fellows I command, and spies commissioned to explore the land. But swayed by lust of gain and headlong will, the coasts they ravage and the natives kill. The spreading clamor to their city flies, and horse and foot in mingled tumult rise. The reddening dawn reveals the circling fields, horrid with bristly spears and glancing shields. Jove thunder on their side, our guilty head. We turn to flight, the gathering vengeance spread. On all parts round and heaps on heaps lie dead. Although Homer wrote these lines more than 3 centuries later, he was describing the age of the Bronze Age collapse, when coastal raids by maritime raiders were common. It is quite possible that this passage preserves folk memory of such expeditions. However, identifying the Equish as Achaeans presents a problem. The great Karnak inscription says clearly that the Equish were circumcised. We know that the Achaean Greeks did not practice circumcision, which leaves room for interpretation. One possible explanation is that these were Greeks who had settled in Canaan, and through intermarriage with the local population, adopted local customs, including circumcision. Other hypotheses about the origins of the Equish have been suggested. Some scholars argue that they may have come from North Africa, where tribes with similar names are attested in later periods. Their alliance with the Libyan prince Murye could also point in that direction. But Egyptian sources consistently describe the Equish as coming from beyond the northern seas, so these theories have not gained wide acceptance. As for the group called the Denyen, the leading theory identifies them with Homer's Danans. This does not seem to have been a distinct ethnic group. Homer uses Danans and Achaeans interchangeably, so these are likely different names for the same people. Other theories link the Denyen with the Danuna, known from the late Hittite and Ugaritic texts, which speak of a people called the Danuna of Cilicia, or the Israelite tribe of Dan. Supporters of the latter often cite the verse in Judges, "And why does Dan dwell in ships?" But both theories are highly speculative and rely entirely on etymology. Apart from linguistic parallels, the strongest argument for identifying the Equish and the Denyen with the Achaeans and Danans comes from the archaeological evidence of Greek naval activity in the eastern Mediterranean. Off Cape Galadonia, for example, a Greek warship dating to around 1200 BC has been found. It contained large quantities of typical Mycenaean bronze weapons and armor, and finds of this kind are not isolated. Regarding the origins of the group known as the Shekelesh, many hypotheses have been proposed. One suggests that they came from the island of Sicily. In historical times, the island was indeed inhabited by a people called the Sicels. Archaeology shows that the Sicels appeared in Sicily at the end of the 2nd millennium BC, which roughly matches the period of the Bronze Age collapse. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, Thucydides, and other ancient authors say that the Sicels once lived in central Italy but were pushed out by the Umbrians and Sabines and eventually ended up in Sicily. The Roman author Marcus Terentius Varro also notes that the Sicel language was closely related to Latin. Other ideas have been put forward as well. The 19th century French archaeologist Gaston Maspero argued that the Shekelesh came from the ancient city of Sagalassos in southwestern Anatolia, near which runs a river called Sheka. But this theory has not gained wide acceptance. The issue is that Hittite documents mention a people called the Shekeleya who live on ships. It is very likely that this is another reference to the Shekelesh. The Hittites knew the peoples of Anatolia extremely well, and it's unlikely that they would have described ships as the place where Shekelesh lived if the group had been Anatolian. This points instead to an overseas origin from the Hittite perspective. Eric Klein, author of 1177 BC, the year civilization collapsed, has suggested another hypothesis, that the Shekelesh, like several other sea peoples, came from the Aegean region and began migrating after the fall of the Minoan Mycenaean world. He also links the Sicels with the Shekelesh, but argues that they reached Sicily only after the events of the Bronze Age collapse. The situation is similar with the Sherden. They are one of the most frequently mentioned sea peoples in Egyptian sources. The most common theory links them to the island of Sardinia. This idea rests mainly on the consonantal similarity of the names. Both the island and the people share the same consonant cluster SRDN. Archaeology shows that Sardinia was home to the Nuragic culture, whose inhabitants built distinctive stone towers known as Nuragi. The tribes living on Sardinia in classical times were known as the Sardi. Excavations on the island have uncovered numerous depictions of ships as well as ship models, likely children's toys, which suggest that the Nuragic people were skilled seafarers. Their round shields, bronze swords, and horned helmets also resemble the Egyptian depictions of Sherden warriors. However, as with the Shekelesh, it is possible that the Sherden either originated on Sardinia or settled there only after their defeat by the Egyptians. Some scholars instead argue for an Anatolian origin, pointing to a region in western Anatolia where the major ancient city of Sardis once stood. Regarding the people known as the Teresh or Tertia, the leading theory identifies them with a group known in Greek sources as the Tyranoi or Tyrsenians. According to Herodotus, the Tyrrhenians came from Lydia, but were forced to migrate because of drought and famine. We know that a prolonged drought in Anatolia was indeed one of the factors that contributed to the Bronze Age collapse, so a migration of Tyrrhenians from Anatolia sounds entirely plausible. After this, the Tyrrhenians are said to have settled in northern Italy, where they later became known under their Roman name, the Etruscans. Another point in favor of an Anatolian origin is that Troy appears in Hittite sources as Tarisha, a name resembling the Egyptian Teresh or Tertia. Roman legend also claimed that the founders of Rome were descendants of Trojan migrants who came to Italy. At first glance, everything seems to fit together very neatly, yet despite how elegant and logical the theory appears, it faces several problems. Archaeologically, the Etruscans, or rather their predecessors, the Villanovan culture, only appear around 900 BC, roughly 3 centuries after the Bronze Age collapse. The Villanovan culture grew out of the Proto-Villanovan culture, and there is no evidence of foreign invasion or major immigration during that transition. Moreover, the Etruscans call themselves Razna, which offers no linguistic link to Teresh Tyrrhenians, and genetic studies show clear continuity between the Etruscans and the earlier Bronze Age population of the Italian peninsula. Even so, attempts to connect the Teresh with the Tyrrhenians have not stopped. Some scholars argue that the Tyrrhenians have first migrated to the Aegean islands such as Lemnos or Lesbos, and only later moved to Italy. A stele found on Lemnos does indeed bear an inscription in a language strikingly similar to Etruscan, but it dates to the 6th century BC, 6 centuries after the Bronze Age collapse. Today, most scholars interpret it as evidence of later Etruscan presence in the Aegean, perhaps merchants rather than proof of an earlier migration route. Another hypothesis links the Teresh to the island of Crete. Egyptian sources explicitly say that the Teresh came from the islands in the sea, and tablets written in Linear B on Crete mention a locality called Teresio or Teresia, modern Tylissos. Other proposals connect the Teresh to places like Tarsus, but all of these ideas rely solely on linguistic similarity and are therefore highly speculative. The Weshesh are one of the most enigmatic of the Sea Peoples. They are mentioned only in a handful of Egyptian documents, and unlike the other groups, the Egyptians left no depictions that can be identified as Weshesh. There are 2 main theories about their origin, both based mostly on the similarity between the Egyptian name and certain place names in the eastern Mediterranean. One hypothesis links the Weshesh to the ancient city of Wassos in Caria. Excavations there have uncovered Mycenaean and Minoan structures and pottery from the Bronze Age. The region around Wassos was at the epicenter of the upheavals during the Bronze Age collapse, so population movements from that area at the time are entirely plausible. Another possible place of origin is the locality of Waxoi on Crete and the nearby town of Waxos. Crete, especially its eastern part, suffered heavily during the Bronze Age collapse, so it is also possible that some of its inhabitants left in search of better prospects in Egyptian lands. While the origins of the Weshesh remain uncertain, their fate is known from Egyptian sources. Pharaoh Ramesses III left an inscription describing what he did with the defeated Sea Peoples. Regarding the Weshesh, he writes the following: "I settled them in strongholds bound in my name. Numerous were their classes, like 100,000s. I taxed them all in clothing and grain from the storehouses and granaries each year." From this text, it is clear that Ramesses III settled the defeated Weshesh in fortresses and imposed tribute on them in the form of textiles and grain. The phrase, "bound in my name," means that they became subjects of the pharaoh. Where these fortresses were located is uncertain. Most likely, as with the other defeated Sea Peoples, Ramesses III settled them in Canaan, although some scholars argue for fortresses in Upper Egypt. In any case, after this, the Weshesh disappear from the historical record. They were almost certainly absorbed into the local Canaanite or Egyptian populations over time. The Tjekker, by contrast, are mentioned much more often in Egyptian documents. The main hypothesis about their origin links them to the Tjekrians, a people who lived in northwestern Anatolia, south of Troy. The strongest argument for this is the striking phonological similarity between Tjekker and Teucrians. It is also entirely plausible that the inhabitants of this region became refugees and migrants during the Bronze Age collapse, as this was the very zone where the Trojan War took place. According to Herodotus, the descendants of the Teucrians were the Girgathes, who later joined the Ionian revolt against the Persian Empire. Ancient authors such as Virgil, Dionysius of Halicarnassus, and Strabo also connect the Teucrians with Crete and Attica. After their defeat in the Nile Delta, the Tjekker were taken captive by the Egyptians. Ramesses III resettled them in Canaan and granted them the town of Dor. The Tjekker transformed Dor from a small settlement into a large and well-fortified Iron Age city. Pottery and household finds at Dor display clear similarities to late Mycenaean material culture. The Egyptian text known as the Story of Wenamun, describing the travels of a priest named Wenamun around 1100 BC, refers to Dor as a great city of the Tjekker and even gives the name of its ruler, Bedr. However, the Tjekker did not remain in Dor for long. Around 1050 BC, the city was burned to the ground. The fire was so intense that the mud bricks turned red, and across the site, archaeologists find a thick layer of ash and debris with evidence of intense burning throughout the settlement. In the 11th century BC, the Phoenician city-states were expanding their influence southward along the Canaanite coast. This was also the period in which the united monarchy of Saul, David, and Solomon took shape. The Tjekker were likely caught between these rising powers and could not withstand them. After the destruction of Dor, the next archaeological layers show a Phoenician presence, and by the early 900s BC, Dor appears in written sources as a Phoenician city. The Sea Peoples were not a single nation or state, but a loose collection of groups that left their ancestral homelands for different reasons and went looking for new lands. Their movements helped shape the end of the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. Some of them blended into local societies, others founded new cities and states, and some ended up as characters in the legends of later peoples. The collapse of the Bronze Age was a turning point after which the ancient world never returned to its old shape. From the ruins of the old empires emerged Phoenician sailors, Assyrian conquerors, Greek city-states, and Etruscan towns. The story of the Sea Peoples is ultimately a story about how one age ends and another begins. If you made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations and history. If you'd like to support the channel, join our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. You get early access to new episodes, behind-the-scenes looks, and more. You can also leave a super thanks below to give us a little extra boost. If you want to listen to history on the go, check out our all-new podcast, Parabellum History. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.